Macbeth starts this play as Scotland's greatest hero. He's respected, he's admired, he's trusted by everyone around him. By the end of the play, he's a murderer, a tyrant, and one of Shakespeare's most tragic characters. So what happened? How does Shakespeare transform Macbeth from a national hero into a man hated by his own country? And perhaps more importantly, was Macbeth driven by fate, or was every step of his downfall his own choice? Let's find out. One of the biggest mistakes students make is assuming Macbeth starts the play as a villain. He doesn't. In fact, Shakespeare goes out of his way to make us admire him. He's a respected nobleman, a successful soldier, a loyal subject of King Duncan. People trust him, people celebrate him. And that's important because Shakespeare wants us to see what Macbeth could have been. If Macbeth had remained loyal, he might have been remembered as one of Scotland's greatest heroes. Instead, Shakespeare shows us how ambition slowly destroys that potential. And that's why Macbeth is often described as a tragic hero. Not because he's perfect, but because he falls so far. What's really interesting is that before Macbeth even appears on stage, everyone is already talking about him. He's described as brave Macbeth. And think about that. Before Shakespeare allows us to judge Macbeth for ourselves, he tells us exactly how other characters see him. And what do they see? A hero, a warrior, someone willing to risk his life for Scotland. Macbeth defeats MacDonald in battle with incredible violence. But at this point, that violence is seen as heroic because it's being used to protect his country. And this is important. Macbeth doesn't change because he suddenly becomes capable of violence. He has always been capable of violence. The difference is what he chooses to use that violence for. This is one of the most important moments in the entire play. Macbeth has just learned that Malcolm will become Duncan's heir. And immediately he says, "Stars, hide your fires. Let not light see my black and deep desires." Notice something. Nobody has told Macbeth to think this way. The witches aren't even there. Lady Macbeth isn't there. These thoughts are entirely his own. This is why many examiners love this quote. It suggests ambition already exists inside Macbeth. The witches didn't create it, they just revealed it. And Macbeth knows those thoughts are wrong. Why else would he want darkness to hide them? He's already trying to conceal his desires from the world, and maybe even from himself. Now here's one of the biggest debates in GCSE Macbeth. Who is really responsible for Macbeth's downfall? The witches or Macbeth? The witches certainly plant the idea. They tell him he'll be king. But they never tell him how he'll be king. They never tell him to murder Duncan. They never tell him to kill Banquo, his best friend. They never tell him to slaughter Macduff's family. Macbeth chooses to do those things. And this is where grade 9 answers often stand out. Instead of saying the witches control Macbeth, they argue that the witches awaken something that already exists. Ambition, desire, temptation. The witches open the door. Macbeth is the one who chooses to walk through it. At the beginning of the play, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are a team. In fact, they might be one of Shakespeare's most closest married couples that he writes about. Macbeth trusts her enough to share his darkest thoughts, and Lady Macbeth understands him better than anyone else in the world. The problem is that she knows exactly how to manipulate him. When she questions his masculinity, she is attacking something incredibly important to him, his identity. his pride, his honour, and it works. What's fascinating is that Lady Macbeth doesn't force Macbeth to commit murder. She simply pushes him towards a decision that he was already considering himself. And this is where Macbeth becomes incredibly complex because he knows exactly what he's about to do. He understands murder is wrong. He understands Duncan is a good king. He understands there will be consequences. And yet he proceeds anyway. And that's what makes Macbeth tragic. If he were completely unaware, we'd feel less sympathy. But Shakespeare shows us a man actively arguing with his conscience. Macbeth sees every reason not to commit the murder and then chooses to do it anyway. The moment Duncan dies, everything changes. Students sometimes expect Macbeth to feel triumphant, but instead he feels almost immediately guilt. He hears voices, he panics, he can't pray. He becomes obsessed with guilt. Macbeth does murder sleep is brilliant because sleep represents peace, rest, innocence, and Macbeth realises he's destroyed all of those things. He has gained a crown but lost the ability to live peacefully. Now this really sums up the entire play. Hero, nobleman, murderer, tyrant, isolated king. What's important is that Shakespeare doesn't rush this transformation. Each step feels believable. Each step is a consequence of the one before. Macbeth doesn't wake up evil. He doesn't become evil through a series of decisions. And that's exactly what makes the downfall so frightening. By Act 3 and 4, Macbeth has changed now completely. And notice what's different. Lady Macbeth isn't planning the murders anymore. Macbeth is. He's become independent. And that's actually worse because now nobody is influencing him. These decisions belong entirely to him. When he orders the murder of Banquo and Macduff's family, we see how far he's fallen. The man who once felt guilty about killing one person can now order the deaths of innocent people without hesitation. Here's the irony. Macbeth gets everything he wants: the throne, crown, castle, power, but he's miserable. And why? Because power hasn't solved his problem, it's created new ones. He's paranoid, terrified, suspicious of everyone. The ghost of Banquo, really important because it shows guilt becoming impossible for him to ignore. Macbeth has gained power but loses peace, and eventually loses everything else too. A tragic hero is someone who starts with a greatness but is destroyed by a fatal flaw. For Macbeth, that flaw is ambition. Everything else follows from that. Murder, paranoia, tyranny, downfall. And the reason audiences feel pity is because we can see that Macbeth could have been great. His tragedy isn't the lack of potential. His tragedy is that he completely wastes it. By Act 5, Macbeth is emotionally empty. When Lady Macbeth dies, he barely reacts. Instead, he gives us one of Shakespeare's most famous speeches, "Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow." This is the moment Macbeth realises ambition has failed him. He has achieved his goals, he's still unhappy. That's Shakespeare's warning. Success without morality can leave you with nothing worth enjoying. Even at the end, Shakespeare doesn't make Macbeth a coward. He fights. He refuses to surrender and he dies a warrior. In some way, the ending brings Macbeth full circle. He began on a battlefield and ends on a battlefield. The difference is that the final battle earned him honour, and this battle is the result of his consequences. essays don't settle for one interpretation on Macbeth himself. They explore the multiple possibilities. Maybe Macbeth is a warning about ambition. Maybe he's a victim of fate. Maybe Shakespeare is responding to fears about political instability after the gunpowder plot. Or maybe Macbeth simply represents a man destroying himself through poor choices. The strongest answer is probably a little bit of everything. If you're short on revision time, I would recommend these quotes. Not because it's lots, there's not 30 on there, but they're versatile. They can be used in lots of different ways. For example, a single quotation like "stars hide your fires" can help with ambition, secrecy, corruption, appearance versus reality, and Macbeth himself. Remember, it's quality over quantity. If you're struggling to create a list of quotes, think about the themes that you want to discuss, characters that represent those themes at different points in the play, and then choose quotes based on those. And you will find as you go through there's a lot of crossover between many of these quotes. Now, if you can answer these 5 questions quite confidently, you're in a great position. Notice that almost every question comes back to a very similar idea of how does Macbeth change. Whether you're discussing guilt, ambition, power, tragedy, you're really exploring the same journey. Hero to tyrant. So let's finish with the most important idea. Macbeth's tragedy isn't that he wanted power. Most people want to be successful. Most people want to achieve something. Macbeth's tragedy is that he's willing to sacrifice everything to get it. His conscience, friendship, marriage, peace, humanity, and eventually his life. And that's Shakespeare's warning. Ambition itself isn't evil, but ambition without moral limits can destroy everything. And that's why over 400 years later, Macbeth remains one of Shakespeare's most fascinating characters.